execution. Somebody had that girl killed. And we should gotta find out who did that and why.
He said, I'm an old man. I may not live to see this solved, so you girls have to make sure that this is what we're going to do as a family.
We've been attempting to get Mr. Tokars to come in and talk to us. We're having a difficult time getting him to come in.
So we explained to him that he should know better than anybody how important it is that we get something rolling right away before the trail got cold.
I'd never seen anybody act like him before. He was just more anxious than sad. He never talked about Sarah. He never said, oh my God, poor Sarah. Oh, what she went through. Poor Rick and Mike. He was just all acting like, I'm scared. I gotta get out of Dodge, he kept saying. He said, Gretchen, I hope you understand. The reason I can't go to the police about anything is because I've taken a lot of money from some shady clients and not paid taxes on them. And I'm afraid if they look into my business dealings, they'll accuse me of tax evasion.
He was pretty nervous. He talked a lot. But at the same time, he didn't give us a whole lot of information. He couldn't remember details.
What kind of insurance policies did you have on Sarah? Sarah and I have the same type of insurance policies. One of them is for $250,000. One of them is for $1 million, and I think that there's another one for $500,000. Every marriage has its ups and downs, but I would be shocked if I thought that she was considering a divorce right now from me.
We had spoken to Rick and Mike, Sarah's small children, and they had told us that she did not sleep with Fred.
The marriage between Fred and Sara Tokars was not in good shape and hadn't been for quite some time. Sarah didn't like the sort of people he was dealing with, the hours he was keeping.
The thing that was the most important to her was to be a mom and to be a really good mom, and she succeeded 100% with that.
She told me that she was afraid of Fred, that he had threatened that if she got a divorce, that he had enough contacts that she would never take the children away.
There were accounts with that looked like hundreds of thousands of dollars in them, with what looked like phony names on the accounts. She said, Karen, I've got all this new stuff on Fred. And she was relieved that this was finally her way out. And I said, what, Sarah? What? Tell me what it was. And she said, no, you can't. I'll tell you when I see you.
She made me promise that if anything ever happened to her, I would take any information that I had to the police.
Sarah posed a real danger to him, exposing his criminal activity. And secondly, there was the motivation of insurance policies.
Welcome to True Crime Brewery. I'm Jill.
And I'm Dick. How's everyone today?
The episode we're doing today is The Wife Who Knew Too Much, Sara Tokars' story. So, Sara Ambrusco, that was the name she was born with, she saw Fred Tokars on the news, and he was just a junior prosecuting attorney at the time, and he was assisting in a gruesome murder trial for an Atlanta attorney who was murdered by his lover. She recognized him as a boy from her hometown high school in a suburb of Buffalo, New York, where she grew up. The familiarity of Fred, a lean, hawk-faced young man, brought back fond childhood memories for Sara. So Sara called him, and then the two started dating. A year later, they were married. Sara felt that she had the dream then. She had a good man, she had plans for children, and a nice house in the suburbs. But before they reached their 8th anniversary, it was all over. Sara was dead, the victim of a brutal execution witnessed by her 2 young sons. Her personal tragedy would move those who loved her to tears, wondering if she could still be alive if she had never made that phone call.
Well, of course she would.
Well, maybe.
I mean, if she hadn't met up with this guy.
Well, true.
Again, after all these years.
Yeah.
She'd be alive.
Well, the fact was that Fred had really changed during those 8 years. Not only from a prosecutor to a criminal defense attorney, but from a man who loved her to a man who wanted her dead. So what did Sara Tokars know about Fred and his criminal dealings that made her a target? We'll talk about that and the precious life that was lost when she was killed. Also, how did those two young children process this crime that they witnessed as they were little boys and they continued the rest of their lives without a mother? That has to be exceedingly difficult.
Well, I would guess. I mean, they watched their mother being shot to death.
They did.
That's just horrible.
It is. There can't be much worse, can there?
I don't think so. Not when you're a little kid.
Right.
And they were, what, 4 and 6 or something like that?
Yep.
Little.
Now, before we begin this discussion in earnest, though, I'd like to thank a few 5-star reviewers. So I'd like to give a thank you to Rach New, Austin Anna, Mrs. JHC, Roaming Girl, Chrissy Scribbles, Chloe Callie, JKL 5876, maybe that's Jackal 5876, Hagen Miller, and Johnson Way. Welcome to the brewery.
Welcome. We got a spot at the quiet end for you.
Head on down.
Come on.
What's our beer?
Our beer is a Georgia beer called Eschaton. The name intrigued me, so I looked it up. And it's an actual word. It means the end of the world.
Wow.
So I guess it's kind of biblical.
Okay.
Anyway, Eschaton is a quad that's brewed by Wild Heaven Craft Beers in Decatur, Georgia. And when I saw that, and I said, oh, I remember this beer, and I remember I had this beer when you and I were at the Brickstore Pub in Decatur a couple years ago.
Yep.
So just to refresh everybody's memory, quads are strong, bold beers. They're dark, they're full-bodied with a rich malty palate. They tend to be sweet without much bitterness. Now this particular one, Eschaton, was served in a snifter. What else?
Yes.
It was dark brown with a thick, sticky, tan head. The aroma was sweet fruit and a toasted malt scent, taste of plums, raisins, some peaches, and some earthiness. Some kind of, outside funky stuff.
Barnish?
Not quite.
No.
It was sweet, kind of chewy in the mouth. So, kind of.
What do you mean chewy? How can a beer be chewy?
Like it was thick.
Oh, okay.
So, nice beer. I think I liked it better than other reviewers did, but that's okay.
Well, that's your opinion. You're welcome to it, yeah.
So, let's open these up.
Okay, let's do it. Okay, Dickie, let's head on down to the quiet end of the bar.
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Okay.
If I'm not mistaken, and I know it's a little early, but there seems to be a leprechaun down there drinking some green beer.
My God, I think you're right.
I mean, it's a little guy.
He's little.
Got a beard, got a jacket and hat.
Green.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, it could be.
It could be. He's got red hair.
Yeah.
Freckles.
Maybe
But it's a while before St. Patty's Day.
It is.
Do they come out early with the pots of gold, or how does that work?
I wasn't aware of that, but I was thinking if he's guarding the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, we should hit him up.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
We could use that now. No, leprechauns aren't real, though.
They're mythical, right?
Right. From Ireland.
They're Irish folklore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so. But did they live a long time?
I'm not sure. I think they live pretty long. Smaller people live longer than big people, at least regulation-sized people. So,
yeah.
Or thinner people live longer than overweight people. How's that?
Right, but what about midgets compared to regular-sized people? Or dwarfs? Do they live as long?
Well, it depends on the syndrome, and I think there's a couple things about that, if I may.
Sure.
So I think we call them all little people now, rather than midgets or dwarves.
That's true.
But to
Sorry
differentiate, a midget is a miniature person. They're proportionate. So,
okay.
So a midget might be 4 feet tall, 3.5 feet tall, but they have normal body proportions. And dwarves are disproportionate, so they have generally normal-sized bodies, normal-sized heads, and small limbs. So that's what differentiates dwarves from midgets.
Okay. But anyone with any of those conditions is just a little person.
A little person.
But what about a leprechaun?
So
are they proportionate?
A leprechaun is a midget in the old vernacular, I guess.
Okay.
Right. They're pretty proportionate.
And what do they do besides give you gold? They're good luck?
I guess they're good luck. They tend to make and repair shoes.
I thought that was, what do you call it? It's the things that Santa has.
The elves?
Yeah, I thought elves help the cobblers with the shoes. But you're saying that leprechauns do that?
Yes, that's their main occupation, plus guarding the pot at the end of the rainbow.
Yeah, so they can be mean.
They can be mischievous. I don't know about mean necessarily.
I think there was a horror film about an evil leprechaun, now that I think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a horror film.
Well, hopefully this one's friendly. Let's go see.
We'll go check him out.
Okay.
And if we could capture him,
yeah,
we get 3 wishes.
Oh, okay.
Now, I don't know that that's allowed.
The capturing?
The capturing part.
We could end up arrested.
We could. So
let's just be friendly with him.
I think we'll just be friendly and hang out with him. He can watch us do the podcast.
Yeah, and then he must have some green dye to put in your beer. Although your beer's so dark, it might just turn a weird color.
Yeah, turn into mud or something.
Yeah.
So.
All right, well, let's get on with this. We're getting silly.
I know. We digressed a little bit. Leprechaun sightings are pretty rare, though, so...
They are, and there might be more as time goes on, because we still have a couple weeks.
We do.
Okay, so it's good to be prepared about these things.
Leprechaun alert.
Have an understanding.
Yep.
Okay. All right, well, talking about understandings, if you want to get an understanding of who Sara Tokars was, then we need to know about her family. So she was actually the middle daughter of 7 girls. Her father, John Ambrusco, was a prominent surgeon in Buffalo. Her mother was a petite stay-at-home mom who'd met John Ambrusco while he was a surgical fellow at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, at the end of World War II. Now, he'd returned from active duty in the South Pacific, where he spent 1 year as the only doctor on a destroyer and another in a field hospital. So Phyllis was a dentist's daughter, and she was eager to have a family. So they married back in 1948, and they moved to Buffalo, where John eventually opened his own general surgical practice. So he was pretty successful.
I guess.
Yeah, and you're going to hear that Sara had a really kind of ideal childhood that she was trying to replicate in her life, which just didn't work out for her.
So by ideal, you mean she had loving parents that cared for her? She had good siblings? She was a good kid growing up?
Good kid, lots of friends, good family.
Yeah.
Lots of family activities together.
So that's her background. That's what she's expecting to achieve when she does start her own family.
Yes, exactly. So we'll talk about that as we go on. Now, her sister Chrissy, she said, we were always the good girls. And she said, we ate our vegetables, we said our prayers, we crossed our legs, and we always said please and thank you. That's how they were raised. Not unusual.
No.
Now, the Ambruscos were devout Catholics, and they went to parochial school. The girls grew up in a spacious 6-bedroom home that Ambrusco had built in Amherst, a really nice Buffalo suburb. So Sara was the optimist in the family. She was an athlete, she was the cheerleading captain, a skier, and her sisters described her as the family organizer. She was always planning holiday activities, cookout trips to the Buffalo Bills games, even in horrible weather, and day trips. Now, when Sara was a teenager, the Ambrusco home was kind of a gathering place for the neighborhood young people, because the mom's a stay-at-home mom, and they've got all these girls there, so it's a popular place for kids to hang out.
I can imagine.
Now, Fred Tokars, he was one of the kids in the neighborhood. They lived just 2 blocks from the Ambruscos, and for 2 years, Fred's younger brother Andy dated Karen Ambrusco, Sara's sister. Now, Andy was almost part of their family back then. He watched football games with Dr. Ambrusco, and he enjoyed having home-cooked meals that Phyllis would make for everybody. So he was a potential husband for her sister, although that didn't work out.
But they had dated for some time.
Yes, over 2 years.
Yeah.
Now, Karen, she said she really adored Andy, but he was kind of off-putting-ish. Now, she'd tell her sisters that he could never bring himself to say back to her that he loved her. So there was kind of a wall there. Now, Fred was Sara's age and in her class at Amherst High School, and he was very quiet like his brother, and he remained only a familiar acquaintance. He didn't really get close to anyone in the Ambrusco family.
So they never dated in high school?
No.
They knew each other?
They knew each other.
Vaguely?
Yeah, well, they recognized each other to say hello and whatnot, but they never really spent any time together.
Yeah.
So Sarah's trusting nature had made her vulnerable to some self-absorbed young men who sometimes took advantage of her generous nature throughout high school. Now Sarah expected to get married and have a family much like her mother had done. And as she graduated high school and went to college at the University of Colorado, she had some relationships, but nothing that would lead to the life that she really wanted. So after graduating from college, Sara returned home to help her parents because her father had cataracts and he ended up having to give up his surgical career. And this was really devastating to him. But,
yeah, how old was he?
He was like in 62.
Middle daughter, graduated high school, yeah. Early
Yeah, they
60s.
married in 48. He wasn't ready to retire yet. He still wanted to work. So he went ahead and he accepted a job as Manatee County's public health director in Bradenton, Florida. So they were going to move there for this new position.
That's a big career change. So he's going from being a successful surgeon to basically not being able to do surgery anymore.
Yeah, it was a big life change. It wasn't easy.
And he became a medical director. Wow. So this was in the, early 80s or so? Mid-80s?
Yeah.
I mean, he must have had cataract surgery. He couldn't see well enough to continue doing his surgical career.
That's what they said, yeah.
Okay. Anyway, I stray.
We're not going to get stuck on that point.
No. So he accepted the position in Manatee County, Bradenton. Phyllis stayed behind to sell the family home. Sara moved to Bradenton with her father. She cooked for him and helped him study for the Florida Medical Board exam. And I've taken that. It's a piece of cake. You don't have to study for it.
You don't?
No.
Why would that be a piece of cake? Don't you have to go to med school to take that test?
Well, he went to med school.
Yes.
I mean, he'd been a practicing surgeon for all these years.
True, but a lot of the stuff you learn in school, you don't use it in your specialty, and you need to study, I would think.
Yeah, as I recall, when I took that test, and that was late 70s, it was easy.
Yeah, but you were still a young man. You were still right out of school.
Okay.
He's been out of school for years and years.
Yeah, I still think.
Oh, maybe it was easy.
It wouldn't have been too difficult for him to pass it.
Well, he did, so, okay.
So Sara was hanging around, helping him study, stayed with him, helping him get adjusted to his new career as a 64-year-old man who's no longer a practicing surgeon, but a medical director for a clinic.
Okay.
And she began teaching 4th grade at a local elementary school.
Yeah, her degree was in education.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she was still athletic. She taught aerobics to senior citizens. So she had a couple different things going on. So she's been married before, apparently.
Yes.
She met her first husband, Steve Wiegand, on the beach near her father's home. He is a handsome man from Illinois who is down on vacation visiting his parents. They began a long-distance relationship. Steve moved to Atlanta to become an instructor at a health club, and he asked Sara to marry him. Steve and Sara had a wedding in Sarasota with a poolside reception and most of their family members there. They bought a condo in an Atlanta suburb. She began teaching at Steve's health club, and she managed the club's accessories shop and marketed its merchandise. It seems a little bit of a demotion, I guess. I mean, she was an elementary school teacher. Now she's doing stuff at a health club.
Yeah, but I think she was a pretty good business person and did well.
She might have been.
Didn't she ended up being a promoter or something?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then when the health club developed some financial problems, Steve ended up being hired by a nightclub. So this is how she made this transition. So he was hired by a nightclub manager to be the front desk manager and the doorman, and soon Sara was hired on to promote the club. Now, this was not the lifestyle that Sara had envisioned at all.
Doesn't sound like.
No.
I think she was aspiring to a little bit higher area.
Yes.
I mean, not as a nightclub worker.
Well, more of a family-oriented life, at least.
Right.
Yeah.
And I suspect she wanted her husband to have a more prestigious job than a nightclub manager.
Well, I don't know if she was into prestige, actually, but I think she did want someone with a good work ethic and a profession that he cared about.
Okay.
Okay, I don't think she wanted someone who was out partying, and that's kind of what happened.
Well, but that's one of the pitfalls of being a nightclub manager.
Right.
You party.
Right. Yeah. Steve became really enamored with the lifestyle. He was using cocaine, started having affairs, And Sara was just crushed by this because her marriage was failing, mostly because she felt like she was really disappointing her parents. She was a devout Catholic, and she sought out an annulment. Now, she wanted to be free to be married again in the church eventually. So she took back her maiden name and continued to work as the nightclub promoter.
So she got an annulment.
Well, she filed for one. I think it takes a while to get that.
Okay.
But she did file for one.
But she wanted that rather than a divorce.
So that she could someday marry in the church again.
Yeah.
She was a traditional person like that. Her family was that way.
Okay. Yep.
So when Sara saw Fred Tokars on the evening news that night, she was excited to see his familiar face. And as they began dating, Fred would fascinate her with his stories of criminal cases, where he was the good guy, the prosecutor, the hero, and Dr. Ambrusco was really impressed by Fred. Fred was a certified public accountant with a law degree, and he was very ambitious. And this was someone that Dr. Ambrusco thought could really provide for his daughter, which was important to him.
Yeah. Now, again, I'm not trying to be negative, but I would think that he'd look more favorably on Fred rather than Steve.
Well, yeah, I can see that.
Mean, Fred's got a better position and seems to be going places. And his former son-in-law was not doing that.
Yeah, he wasn't really ambitious like Fred. Fred's very ambitious.
Yeah.
To a fault, we'll find out.
Well, yes, true. But I think this was the kind of guy that parents would approve of.
Yes, which was really important to Sara. She loved her parents.
And someone that Sara would be happy with because he was a go-getter.
Right. Well, Chrissy, Sara's sister, thought that Sara may have actually been more in love with the image that Fred portrayed than with the man himself. Plus, Sara was getting older and she really wanted to start having kids. Now, Sara and Fred eloped in a simple civil ceremony in the courtroom where Fred prosecuted felony cases. She'd already had a traditional Catholic wedding, she explained to her family. Also, the Catholic Church had not yet finished giving her the annulment from her first marriage. So Sara insisted that she was happy with this, though, even though her family doubted because they thought she wanted to have the traditional wedding, and this was probably Fred's idea.
Well, yeah, but if they're not annulled, if the first marriage wasn't annulled, she couldn't get married in the Catholic Church anyway.
Right. But I think they were going to give it to her. It was just a matter of time.
Well, I guess they didn't want to wait.
Yeah, it seems like that was it. So in the beginning of the marriage, she did seem pretty happy. But Fred was not the most attentive husband. He rarely ate dinner at home, choosing to dine with his business associates. And he was hosting weekend seminars and teaching night school classes as well. Now, within 5 months, Sara was pregnant, and shortly before their first child's birth, they bought a suburban home near Atlanta's most exclusive country club. Now, this really stretched the limits of their finances and their budget, but Fred wanted a kind of a showy, nice house.
Now, has he started his own practice at this point, or is he still a prosecutor?
He's still a prosecutor at that point.
So he's not making that much.
No, right. And she's making more than he was at that point, actually.
Yeah.
But this was a beautiful home, had a large backyard and a wooded lot, and it reminded Sara of her childhood home, and that's what she wanted. So it really did surprise Sara, though, when Fred decided to quit his job at the Fulton County District Attorney's Office and open his own law practice. Now, Fred was anxious to make more money, and he knew he could make a much larger salary as a private tax and criminal defense attorney.
Well, of course.
Yes.
I mean, prosecutors are paid chicken feed.
Yes, he wasn't
comparatively.
making much. Right.
So if you want to use your law degree to make some income, you're not going to be on the prosecutorial side.
Well, I don't know, I suppose. But, I mean, there are ways to move up in that segment, and it's not a terrible job. I mean, you certainly can take good care of yourself. I'm not implying that, but while you can move up in advance, it takes a lot of time. Yes.
It's not like you're instantly chief prosecuting attorney or anything like that.
Right, and he wanted to be wealthy. He wanted to make money right away.
Yeah.
Plus, he was, a tax attorney, so that made sense. But I guess Sara kind of saw him as a prosecutor, as a hero, and that image just went away when he decided to just go for the money and not be, the good guy, as she saw him as a prosecutor.
Yeah.
As fighting for justice and all that.
Well, it doesn't make him a bad guy to be a defense attorney or a tax attorney.
Well, it depends who you talk to, I guess.
Well, I mean...
No, you're right.
He went to the darker side of that.
Well, if you're a criminal defense attorney, you're going to be dealing with criminals. Doesn't mean that you have to be that way. I mean,
Right.
I'm sure most are fine and are not criminals.
You're going to defend them. And being a tax attorney doesn't necessarily mean you're crooked.
It doesn't.
Although the opportunity probably is there.
Yeah, probably a lot of temptations having both of those things going on.
Right.
Yeah. Especially with criminals. But we'll see that he really did get involved in that stuff.
In a big way.
In a very big way. Now, Fredric William Jr., as he was born in 1986, and they began calling him Ricky, so this is their first baby. Now, Sara told her sister Chrissy that Fred changed when he went from working at the DA's office to his own private practice. He was no longer the kind, giving person that she thought she'd married, but she knew that he was under a lot of stress. He was starting his own practice, so she tried to be supportive. Now, Sara had always assumed that once the baby was born, she would quit her job and stay home with the baby. That's just her expectation.
Well, that's how it was in her home.
That's what she wanted. But when she broached the topic with Fred, he got angry and objected. He didn't want her to stay at home.
Yeah, which kind of stunned her.
Yeah.
I mean, she was planning on staying home with the kids. That had always been her plan. And she thought she had made that clear to her husband. But Fred said that staying at home was not an option. Well, yeah. Again, I think there's a lot of money pressures here that are in this house in a big ritzy neighborhood. He's just starting his new practice. There's probably a tremendous amount of monetary pressure.
I'm sure, but I think, if she puts the kid in daycare and goes to work, usually you're not clearing that much money by the time you go through all the expense of getting daycare and doing this and that. But
yeah.
I don't know. Maybe he had a legitimate reason for it, but he seemed kind of over the top about it.
Yes, he did. So she continued to work, but at the same time she tried to come home early whenever she could to be with little Ricky. However, there were still evening promotional events at nightclubs that she had to attend, so she's still doing some of that stuff.
Yeah, that's what she went back to, was her promoting job.
Yeah. So one of these events, her absence led to a bitter argument between Sara's sister Chrissy and Fred. Chrissy happened to be babysitting Ricky that night while Sara organized an event at Sneakers nightclub, and Fred was working late. Ricky became ill. Chrissy called Sara, who immediately headed home. She and Fred arrived home at the same time. "Sara, I'm here," Fred said. "You can go back to work now." And Sara said, "That's okay, I'll stay here." "No," Fred insisted. "You need to go back and make sure you get your job done. I can handle Ricky."
Yeah, so he's not very nice.
Yeah. Chrissy didn't like how Fred spoke to Sara, and she came to her defense.
Yeah, which, I'm sure she didn't want to see her sister berated like that.
Right. So Chrissy jumps in. "Fred, look, if she doesn't have to go back to work, she doesn't have to go back." And this eventually turned into an argument that estranged Chrissy from Fred.
Yeah.
So he burned some bridges there.
Early on, because this is just after their first child.
Right.
Yeah.
Not too long. I mean,
didn't take long.
Year and a half or so, right?
Right.
Sara called Chrissy later to apologize for her husband. This is interesting. "I think I'll divorce him," she said. "He's not the man I married."
Right.
So already the bloom is off.
The bloom is off the rose, yeah.
So Sara continued to work until the nightclub scene experienced a decline in business. Her employer let her go, so she did become a stay-at-home mom, but by default. However, when she did become unemployed, Fred seized complete control of their finances. He refused to let her have a checking account or credit cards. Now there's a big red flag, huh?
Yeah, but she's already in pretty deep.
He insisted that she pay the bills either with money orders or cash. He refused to buy any new furniture or pay for household repairs and upkeep. He also insisted that his clients pay him in cash, so he could sidestep state and federal taxes. So he's already on the slippery slope here.
Yeah, which makes me think maybe he wasn't so honest to begin with, because he's quickly going into some big dishonesty here.
He quickly is.
Yeah.
So instead of a joint account, Fred gave Sara a weekly allowance. And with this allowance, she was expected to buy groceries, buy household supplies, pay medical bills, and maintenance of the household.
Yeah.
I hope it was a generous allowance.
Well, it wasn't a small amount of money, but considering the situation she's in, it wasn't really enough money to handle things.
I'll bet it wasn't.
Yeah. Now, rarely, Fred would give Sara some additional money for some kind of unanticipated expense. But often he would just refuse. He'd tell her that he didn't have any money. And then all of her expenses that she had, she needed to itemize, and she had to give him receipts. So this is super controlling.
Yeah, well, that's how I do it with you.
Yeah.
You know?
Sure.
Yeah.
Not at all. Now, Fred resented Sara spending the money he earned, and he wanted her to return to work. So she did try. She established a small promotional company, and she did get some contracts. But Fred told anyone who would listen that Sara was not good with money and that she was a spoiled brat. Now, Maurice Silver, who shared a law office with Fred, had a conversation with Sara that he would never forget. So, shortly before her second child was born, he'd invited the Tokars to a party he was hosting, and Sara called him to express her regrets. She said that she and Fred wouldn't be able to attend. So she said to him, "I feel so bad that we can't be there, but I'm not well." So Silver, he offered sympathy and told Sara that the invitation remained open if her health was to improve. But there was this short, kind of awkward silence at the other end of the phone, and then Sara said softly, "I can't come because I have bruises on my left arm and side where Fred beat me." Now Silver was shocked to hear this, and Sara pleaded with him not to say anything. And then she finally said to him, "Don't even tell Fred that I called." So her sisters didn't know anything about physical abuse, but apparently that was happening. Now, Michael Philip Tokars was born in April of 1988, their second child, but Fred's reaction to the birth was pretty much just indifference. Phyllis Ambrusco came to Atlanta to see her newborn grandson and to help her daughter. She was troubled by Fred's lack of involvement. He didn't care for their older son, Ricky, or do any household chores, and when he was home, which wasn't too often, he was either exercising or doing paperwork in his basement office. Now, after Michael's birth, Fred had a vasectomy, and he made this decision alone without consulting Sara. He didn't want any more children. So this was pretty sad for Sara, too, because she did want kind of a larger family than that. His control over their finances became even more difficult for Sara. She needed some dental work that he wouldn't pay for, and the deck on the house had rotted and really needed to be rebuilt. So this really isn't the life she wanted. It's not turning out the way that she expected, and she's having trouble dealing with this. She's pretty much on her own here.
She is.
Yeah.
And this dream house in the in the upscale neighborhood needed a lot of work.
It did. People who'd been inside said, it's this fancy neighborhood, this nice house, but the furnishings and stuff were just kind of crappy.
Right. Downstairs toilet leaked. The floor around the toilet had rotted. Skylights needed repair. The house was shabbily, sparsely furnished, even though Fred claimed to have an income of over $200,000 a year. And this is 30 years ago, basically. I mean,
it's a ton of money.
A ton of money. No curtains. Living room had an old black couch and chairs. Dining room chairs were canvas director-type chairs. Fred said he had an injured back, refused to do any housework or yard work, so that either Sara did it or didn't get done, because he wasn't going to hire anybody to do that.
Yeah, this guy's weird. I mean, I think there's something definitely wrong with his brain. Besides just being a criminal, he seems odd.
Yes, he does.
Yeah.
So she was always trying to make ends meet. And then one time she surprised him in his basement office. He was snorting a line of white powder, which was probably cocaine, but he told her it was a sinus medicine. Well, I guess...
Are there sinus medications like that, Dr. Dick?
There used to be.
Snort? Really?
Well,
white powder?
The cocaine used to be part of sinus medicines.
Yeah, but not in the 80s.
No, not for many, many years. So we have a little side note here. This is interesting. When the hotel magnate Leona Helmsley was in jail for tax evasion, she simply signed her husband's tax return. Sara told her sister Chrissy, "If that's the case, I'm in big trouble because Fred makes me sign stuff all the time. But I can never read it. He won't let me do it." So he's having her co-sign things?
Yes.
Which she has no idea what she's signing.
She's not allowed to read them.
Well, one more red flag.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Leona Helmsley said that, but I don't think that she was that innocent.
No.
She just tried to blame it on...
Leona wasn't.
No.
But Sarah's taken the same line as that, I'm signing these things and I have no idea what I'm signing.
Right. So that made her nervous, which is probably right. She should be nervous.
Rightly so.
Yeah. Well, Sara knew that Fred counted criminals among his clients, and because he was often paid in cash, She did suspect that many of his clients were drug dealers. Now, Fred always carried a gun in his coat pocket, too, and he kept more guns in the house, and he slept with a gun on the bedstand at night. So that would make me very uncomfortable.
Well, that's real comforting. And you have 2 little kids in the house.
Yeah, right. So she wasn't only disappointed in her marriage, she was becoming afraid and really uncomfortable with the whole situation. Now, one day, Sara called her sister, and she was frantic with fear. Fred was defending a client who'd admitted to sexually abusing small children. Now, Fred had gone ahead to the client's house with their 2 sons, Ricky and Mikey. So that made her very upset.
I guess.
So she began hiring someone to babysit the boys when she was away, even if Fred was home. So what she'd do is she just wouldn't pay a bill, or she canceled getting a housekeeper and things to try and keep some of the money to get a babysitter, so that she wouldn't have to leave the kids with their own father. That's a hell of a situation.
Oh, it is. But he must, I mean, if she was hiring a sitter even for when he was at home, he must have known about that.
Yeah, but he's probably the kind of guy that was just happy that happened. Right?
Yeah, because then he didn't have to take care of it.
Right. He was just very into this career, which was very crooked, it seems like.
It sounds like he's doing things that aren't entirely legal.
Right. And there were times when Fred did treat Sara kindly, but those times never seemed to last very long. Sara was a very non-confrontational type of person, and she'd do almost anything to avoid a fight. She'd always been the peacemaker in her family, and she couldn't understand Fred's unpredictable anger. And when she discussed this with her family, she just was kind of like, I can't understand why. And she would just say, Fred is just so mean without any reason that I can think of why. Doesn't matter how nice I am to him or how much I try and please him. He just seems angry a lot of the time. So she was expressing this to her sisters, that things weren't great. They did know that.
Right. But, and we've talked about this before, I mean, like most women in an abusive relationship, Sara began to doubt her own judgment.
Yeah, I think that happens.
You think, I must be doing something wrong.
Right.
So she grew terrified of displeasing Fred. Her ability to make decisions was impaired, and she seemed incapable of handling even small problems without questioning herself. So things are really deteriorating here. Mother's Day 1989, Sara found out that Fred was having an affair. His lies were so blatant that she could see he no longer cared if she believed him. He went away for Bermuda that weekend without her. This was Mother's Day. So no Mother's Day cards or breakfast in bed, as Fred had told her he was traveling to the islands on business. Sara discovered the other woman's name in a business diary that Fred left behind. So she was very hurt and angry. She called her youngest sister, and they decided to hire a private detective. She hired Ralph Perdomo in May 1989, giving him $1,000. Later, with no more cash, she gave him her engagement ring and pearls. She didn't know that Perdomo had worked for lawyers who were colleagues of her husband, including a former law school classmate who would become Fred's partner. So there might be a bit of a conflict of interest here, huh?
Well, I think that's why he didn't seem to believe her later on, or really he wasn't very helpful.
Yeah.
Now, when Sara hired him, she warned him and his assistant that her husband was a former assistant DA in Atlanta, and that he knew many of the city police, and he wouldn't hesitate to call them if he suspected he was being followed. Now, she gave the PI the address where her husband might be having his affair, and Sara didn't know the apartment was home to one of her husband's clients as well, a drug dealer who shared it with Fred's lover. Now, the PI staked out the apartment, and he spotted Fred there, but then minutes later, he noticed the curtains move a little bit in the window, and an unmarked police car pulled up beside him within a couple of minutes. And they told Perdomo that they'd received a complaint. Now, Perdomo admitted that he was a PI, but he had a story ready. He said he was looking for a runaway child for a family. So that summer, Sara asked Fred for a divorce, but Fred wasn't relieved like she thought he might be, because he didn't seem very into the marriage. But he told Sara that the divorce was out of the question. He said the affair was just a fling, and if Sara went ahead with the divorce, he told her he'd get custody of the boys. He said he had some very powerful friends, and Sara would rarely, if ever, see Mikey and Ricky if she got a divorce from him. Now, she was afraid of Fred and what he would do if she left him. What she didn't know was that Fred didn't really have that many connections as he claimed to have, but she had no way of knowing whether his threats were real. Now, Perdomo, the PI, and Sara didn't know why the undercover police were watching the townhouse where Fred had been meeting his lover. Now,
Well, there's a drug dealer in that house, too.
Yes.
So maybe that was why.
That could have been why. Now, Sara's cousin asked her if she knew what Fred was involved in, and Sara said that Fred made a point of hiding his business dealings from her. She knew that he kept records in his basement office at home, though. So Sara decided to check Fred's desk and files in the hopes that maybe she would find something to help her to get a divorce and custody of her children. So just days later, Sara called her cousin from the basement of her house, and this was a room that Fred had forbidden her to enter. She was sitting at Fred's desk, and in a file drawer she found the combination to Fred's safe. She also found several folders, and inside the safe there was a folder marked Montserrat. Now, Montserrat is one of several small island commonwealths, and the banking laws there leave a lot of openings for easy money laundering and tax evasion. And her cousin was kind of knowledgeable about these kind of things and warned Sara that this was a bad sign, that he was probably doing some illegal activities.
Probably.
Yes. But instead of making her own copies of the documents as her cousin had suggested, Sara called Ralph Perdomo for help. So she asked the PI to come to her house. It was in July or August, so this was a really hot and humid month in Georgia. It was very uncomfortable.
Well, they always are.
Yeah. And when Perdomo visited Sara's house, her husband was out of town, and she owed Perdomo a lot of money already. But she went out to the driveway and met him and escorted him into the house. And when they got inside, it was just stifling, and she apologized for the heat. She said the air conditioner was broken and her husband wouldn't have it repaired. So once they're in the basement, Sara opened the safe, and she wanted to know if her husband was a criminal. So she's showing Perdomo these papers, because she thought if she could prove that Fred's legal practice was crooked, then she could get her children and leave him. But Perdomo refused to look at the files. He didn't trust her because Fred Tokars had a good reputation in the community, and Perdomo depended on attorneys for his jobs and some of his wages, so he was really hesitant to become involved. Also, Sara owed him a lot of money already. So he said to Sara, I'm sorry, but I won't be able to help you. So Sara was really crushed, but the PI just wasn't interested. He wouldn't listen to her. So as she walked him out, she asked him one last thing. She said, if anything ever happens to me, will you please turn over my files to the police? So the detective agreed, but he wasn't moved by it. To him, she just appeared to be a vengeful wife with no financial resources.
Well, yeah, you're going to tell that story in hindsight. Probably at the time he was a perfect asshole.
Yeah. Why do you think? Because he thought that she was just a unhappy wife.
Right. And then what happened. So he's putting the best spin he can on it.
Well, it's still not a very good spin, though.
It's not.
No.
But it's better than it would have been.
Why wouldn't he help her? And if she's saying, if anything ever happens to me, there's a big red flag.
Uh-huh.
We've heard that so many times.
Oh, I know.
So if anyone ever says that to me, I'm going to be right on top of it. There are probably plenty of people who say it and nothing happens, but the ones we read about, when they say it, they're dead a few days later or whatever.
There's always a reason for them saying it.
Sure. Well, after Sara had asked Fred for a divorce, he'd changed his will, too. And he made his brother Andy the sole trustee. And he also insured Sara's life for $1.5 million, and this was in addition to a $250,000 policy that he purchased on her life back in 1987. And he was the sole beneficiary for these policies.
So the $1.5 million policy was a new policy?
Yes.
So I'm thinking there's some plans afoot.
Yeah, but just to be smart about it, he got the same policy for him.
Right.
With her as the beneficiary.
Well, yeah,
but still.
That's to avoid too many red flags, but still it's just a huge cautionary thing to be buying a big insurance policy.
Yes. Yeah.
Shortly before your wife gets killed.
Right. Well, that October, Sarah's cousin invited her to lunch. She wanted to talk to her about all this stuff. And she was really worried about Sarah's well-being at this point. She was afraid that Sara really didn't fully understand the implications of her marriage to this man who was involved in a real criminal underworld with drug dealers and God knows who else.
Yeah, he was doing a lot of stuff.
She was, and her cousin just didn't think that he was, and Sarah's cousin just didn't think that Sara really was, it was really getting through to her how serious this was, that it was really dangerous.
Yeah, because there was every indication that Fred was involved in money laundering.
Yes.
Not good. It's a federal offense, right? And tax evasion. But when her sister Mary tried to explain all this to Sara, she was in a certain amount of denial. Sara decided to postpone her plans for a divorce until the children were older.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
Yeah. There's never a time that they get old enough, you know?
That's true.
So,
I mean, I guess you can wait till they're in college, but they're still not going to like it.
No. Like I said, they're never old enough. She's convinced that Fred would get custody if she divorced at that time. Months passed, and it was difficult for those close to Sara to know if she didn't understand the significance of Fred's documents, or if she just didn't believe it. Yeah, I think she just pushed that aside.
Yeah.
Compartmentalized it.
Well, I think this is a young woman under a lot of stress in many ways. It's hard for her to focus on one thing.
Yeah, but I think she just pushed that stuff in the background.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like if your hair's on fire, you're not going to notice a leaky faucet. You know,
right.
You've always got something bigger to worry about.
Exactly. She did finally make copies of the documents, though. That's good.
Yeah.
And there became evidence that Fred had bank accounts in the Caribbean from drug dealers in South Florida. There's also evidence that Fred had also banked vast sums of money on several Caribbean islands. And this confirmed Sara's suspicions that he was evading taxes. She gave the documents to her sister Chrissy and repeated the same thing. If anything ever happens to me, take these to the police. So for much of 1990, she seemed resigned to live in her loveless marriage, and she began sleeping in the children's room, so they weren't even cohabitating.
No.
Well, I guess they were cohabitating, but they weren't sleeping together.
Right. Not in the same room.
No.
So despite Fred's objections, Sara did continue to visit her parents every 3 to 4 months. Now, Fred no longer gave gifts on holidays or birthdays, but Sara loved the holidays. So she'd organize holidays at her parents' house in Bradenton, inviting her sister and their families. But Fred usually didn't attend, or if he did, it was only for a short time. So he refused to pay for flights for Sara and the boys. So Sara outfitted her car with a small TV and VCR and drove the boys down by herself. And occasionally Fred would join her, following her with his own flight to Tampa. No, he's not going to drive.
Yeah, so she has to drive with the kids.
And then pick him up at the airport.
And he gets to fly and get picked up.
He's a very important, busy man.
Yeah, he's a dick.
Yeah. Now, by 1989, Fred was a part-time traffic court judge in Atlanta. So he's really a workaholic, too. He's just all about earning money. And he began talking to Sara about moving to North Fulton County or Atlanta. He bought a $190,000 lot in Sandy Springs and told his wife that they would build there and enroll the boys in school there. Now, in the spring of 1991, Sara met with a divorce attorney. She was recognizing what her husband was and had let him know that she knew it. So Sara told the attorney how she'd gone on a business trip to the Bahamas with Fred in 1988, and he was looking at offshore banks. And she said he'd spent an entire day while they were there opening bank accounts for some of his American clients. So she told the attorney how she feared that his connections might help him get custody of the boys. And the lawyer disagreed, though. He told Sara that based on Fred's lack of interest in the children, there would be little chance of him getting custody. He didn't address Sara's suggestion that Fred was committing financial fraud. He wasn't sure if that was true. Now, Ralph Perdomo had already warned him about Sara and said that he thought Sara's allegations were false just based on bitterness in the marriage. So it's kind of like these guys from the men's club are kind of saying, oh, well, this is just some hysterical little lady that we're not going to take seriously.
Right.
I don't like that.
I know.
Kind of shitty.
I know you wouldn't like that.
No. But the lawyer couldn't guarantee that she would get custody of the children, so she was still hesitant, and she didn't go ahead and file for the divorce. But, she wasn't just sitting at home with her eyes closed. She was an intelligent woman. She'd worked in business before. Her search for information on Fred's business and her contemplation of divorce made her a real target. If she was to file for divorce, and if a custody battle was to begin, then an examination of Fred's finances would definitely happen, and he would be exposed. And then his connections with drug dealers and money laundering, all that could be found out.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
So why doesn't she just go ahead and do it?
Well, I think she's afraid that he would take care of her then, because that would all become exposed. Right?
I can see that.
Yeah.
But I mean, if her other overriding thing was that she might not get custody of the kids, it's apparent that she would in a divorce.
Probably.
But so I guess at this point she's more worried about her own safety.
Might be, yeah, that's a good point. That might be the case.
Or maybe the safety of her kids, I don't know, but at least her own safety.
Right. Also money. I mean, she's not really in a position to take care of herself and her children financially without him. So that might be something too, because he's not going to be really forthcoming taking care of her.
No, he probably wouldn't.
No.
And if he was charged and jailed for money laundering, he wouldn't have any money to give her anyway.
Yeah, everything would probably be taken.
Right.
Well, Sara and Ralph Perdomo hadn't known it, but Fred Tokars was already being investigated by the Atlanta Police Department, so that's why that undercover police car was there in the first place. They were watching him.
So they weren't watching the drug dealer, they were watching Fred.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Because he was already becoming pretty well known in the area for handling the money of the criminals. So he's not really pulling one over like he thinks he is.
No, it doesn't sound like it.
No. So he was involved in many deals. Tokar's attorney would later insist that Tokars never knowingly permitted any of his clients or associates to act as a front man for a criminal, but it was clear to Sara that her husband was involved with some really dangerous people. Now, Sara was living in fear of her husband's clients, even though she couldn't bring herself to leave him. She was really unhappy, and she was kind of just living through her children as she tried to recreate her happy childhood for them. But that's just such a losing battle in this situation.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it's really. She enrolled Ricky and Mikey in Catholic school, and she started volunteering there a couple days a week. And then, shortly before Thanksgiving 1992, 2 men entered the Tokars' home. So it was very early morning, still dark out, and Sara and the boys were asleep. Fred was away. So this Curtis Rower, a 22-year-old drug addict, and Tokar's business partner, Eddie Lawrence, were the intruders. Curtis would later tell police that Lawrence knew Sara and her sons would be sleeping together in the children's room. And he also knew that the sliding glass door would be unlocked, and that's the door that they entered through that night. Now, they also knew that the burglar alarm was turned off, but after the 2 men entered the house, Ricky's dog Jake started barking, and a light came on, and they got frightened and left. So that was a close one.
So, well, I know that they were involved in her slaying.
Yes.
So this was like not
this
a
was
trial
a first
run.
attempt.
This was an attempt.
Yes.
But they got frightened away.
And left.
Wow.
Yeah, scary, huh?
So, well, you'll tell me, but she woke up and to the alarm going off and stuff?
No, the alarm was turned off.
She woke
Fred had already made sure the alarm was turned off and the door was unlocked so they could get in.
She woke to the barking dog?
Yes. And then they took off, and I don't think she knew that they were ever there.
So she just figured the dog was barking at the moon or something.
Sure. You never know what a dog's barking at, right?
No, we have some of those.
Yeah. Random barks.
Random barks.
Right. So she didn't even know about it, but it's just really creepy to think about. The only reason we know about it is because later when Curtis confessed, he told police about that attempt.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Now, 2 days before Thanksgiving, Sara and her boys left for her parents' house in Florida, and on her way, she stopped at the Tampa airport and picked up her husband, Fred. And that Saturday around 1:30 a.m., the security company that monitored the Tokars' house called. A fire alarm had gone off in their house, but there was no fire. And then 6 hours later, early in the morning, the security company called again. A second alarm had gone off. Now, Sara answered the phone, but Fred told Sara to just have the alarm turned off. We'll worry about it later.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that day, Tokars left for Atlanta. and Sara, Ricky, and Mikey stayed in Florida. Sara bought a Christmas tree with the intention of returning with the boys before Christmas to decorate it at her parents' house. And at 11 p.m., Fred was back in their house in Atlanta, and he called Eddie Lawrence.
Uh-huh.
Now, Lawrence says that what Fred Tokars told him in this call was that his water heater was broken and asked him to come and repair it, but that Lawrence said he couldn't do it.
Now, why would he? This is a business associate, right?
Yeah, but I think Lawrence was kind of a construction person as well.
Well, it just sounds like an incredulous story.
Well, it is.
My water heater's broken. Can you come fix it?
Yeah, no, I can't.
Okay.
So, of course, we think this call had something to do with the planned murder of Sara.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, on Sunday, John and Brusco took Sara, Ricky, and Mikey out to lunch before they headed back, and they left around 12:45 in the afternoon for Atlanta. And he said when they left, they were singing I'll Be Home for Christmas because they planned to come back and spend Christmas with John and Phyllis. So 15 minutes after Sara had left, Fred called his father-in-law and asked what time Sara and the kids would be home. And John said, about 9:30 or 10 p.m. Now, within an hour of that call, Fred Tokars placed a second call to Lawrence. And Lawrence told police that Fred said he'd gotten someone to fix the water heater, and then we just talked for a little bit about some other business things, but nothing really transpired in that call. So Tokars told Lawrence that he was leaving town, and that afternoon he left for Montgomery, Alabama, where he had an appointment with a federal prison inmate client. So Sara had promised her father that she'd call him as soon as she and the boys arrived home, but of course he never got that call, because we know when she got home, that's when she was murdered shortly after that.
So her father waited for Sara to call. Finally, he called her. Line was busy. Later, they learned that it had been taken off the hook, so you were just going to get busy signals. So just after 10 o'clock, Sara pulled into a garage. Mikey was asleep in the back seat. That's the younger one.
Yes.
Sara let him sleep while she, Ricky, and the dog got out of the car. Must have been tired. Yeah, I mean, she's been driving for 10 hours.
With two little kids and a dog.
Kids.
Yeah.
She'd probably just opened the door when she saw a man in the dark holding a sawed-off shotgun. This is Curtis Rower. The dog barked. Rower kicked the dog and forced Sara and Ricky back into the car. He climbed into the back seat next to Mikey and behind Sara, put the gun to her head and told her to drive. Rower would later tell police that Sara pleaded with him not to hurt her or her kids. Rower had apparently been waiting inside the house for over an hour before Sara got home. He knew where she had been and when to expect her home. He knew the house alarm was off. Guess where that info came from. Lawrence was with him at the house that night, so we have co-conspirators here.
Yeah. Well, Lawrence had offered Rower $5,000 to kill Sara. Her husband wanted her dead, Lawrence said, because she was standing in the way of him getting a loan that he needed.
Yeah, well, that's a perfectly good reason to kill your wife, right?
Sure, right. Once Rower was in the car with a gun to Sara's head, he really wasn't sure what to do because he hadn't been paid and Lawrence was gone, so he thought that Lawrence had just left him. Now, by the time Sara drove away from the house, Rower was sure that Lawrence had bailed on him. But he ordered Sara to take him to an Atlanta housing project, but she didn't know the way to get there, and he couldn't tell her how to get there. So about half a mile away, he told Sara to turn down a darkened street that ended in a cul-de-sac. But Sara pulled off to the side of the road instead. And by this time, little Mikey was awake, and he had begun tugging on Rower's clothes. So how horrifying is that?
Oh, God.
So.
And the dog's in the car, too. Right?
Yeah.
So this must have been some commotion.
I'm sure. So Rower had been giving strict instructions, though. Don't do nothing to the kids, he was told.
Well, that's really nice of the people who ordered this hit.
Yeah. Well, Sara offered him her purse. She begged him to leave. She even said, "You can have the car, just don't hurt me or the kids." Then Rower saw Eddie Lawrence parked nearby. He had like a getaway car. And Lawrence came over to Sara's car. So Rower would say later that Sara seemed to know Eddie, which she did, and she looked shocked when she saw him there. She must have thought, this is all a setup. She must have known then when she saw him that...
Yeah.
Yeah.
She knows this isn't some random act.
Right.
She sees this guy who's a client of her husband's.
Pretty terrifying.
Yeah.
So Rower shot Sara in the back of the head right then, and she slumped over the wheel. Now the car was still running, and it rolled forward and came to a stop in a field, and Rower just ran away. Now, covered in his mother's blood, little Ricky reached over and turned off the engine, and he pulled his little brother from the back seat. So the two are crying. It must just be horrible.
Oh, indescribable.
But you really have to give this Ricky credit to turn the engine off and take his little brother and go for help.
Mm-hmm.
So crying, they're holding hands and they run to a nearby house. I can't imagine answering my door and seeing this.
No.
Now Ricky wanted someone to call their grandfather. It's really sad. He said that his grandfather was a doctor and he could help their mother.
Poor little kid.
I know, right? So police contacted Fred Tokars. He was at a Montgomery hotel. And Florida police went to the Ambrusco's home a little after midnight to break the news to them. John Ambrusco would remember that that Fred Tokars was hysterically crying when he talked to him on the phone. Now, police arrested Eddie Lawrence 3 weeks later, and they found out that Tokars had given him $70,000 a little while before this happened. Now, informants told police that Lawrence had been looking for a hitman before Sara's murder. Lawrence denied having any role in her death. The boyfriend of Rower's sister, who worked for Eddie Lawrence, came forward to the police. He said that Lawrence had offered him $5,000 to kill Sara, but he'd turned him down. But he said that Rower had accepted the offer. So 2 days before Christmas, police found Rower hiding at a cousin's house, and 12 hours later, Rower had confessed. The next day, Fred Tokars left his children with Sara's family and went to a hotel. He put a do not disturb sign on the door, and then he took pain pills and drank a large amount of alcohol. And he was found later unconscious. And he had written a suicide note also that claimed that he was innocent. Yeah.
That's so laughable.
Yeah. What do you mean?
Well, I mean, you know that he's involved.
Yes. But even in death, he's not going to own up to it.
I'm innocent.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Now, on December 31st, Tokar spoke at a news conference, and he begged the media to leave him alone. He said that his wife's murder had cost him his entire lifestyle, which people thought that's a weird thing to say.
Well, you could say that.
Yeah. So he's not really saying how much he misses her and how heartbroken or worrying about his kids
or worrying
and what
about
they saw.
kids or anything like that.
No.
Just, this fucks up my lifestyle.
This is putting a cramp in things for me.
Yeah, too bad.
Very self-absorbed.
But within a matter of days, Fred Tokars closed his law practice. He began to liquidate his assets, put his house on the market, moved to West Palm Beach with his mother, leaving his kids with Sara's family. So he didn't even take his kids with him.
No.
Initially, after Sara was murdered, her parents and sisters gathered at a hotel outside Atlanta with Fred and the boys. For the boys, the family tried to be calm. Okay, but Fred seemed out of control. He kept crying, "I want my mommy."
I know. Weird, huh?
That's his wife, not his mommy.
No, he wanted his mom.
Oh, Fred.
He literally wanted his mom.
Huh.
Isn't that weird?
So they contacted Fred's mother, Norma, who was in Atlanta, and asked her to come to the hotel. And Fred didn't quiet down until his mother lay down on the bed with him.
So this is a strange guy.
God.
Yeah.
Then after the funeral, Fred agreed that Ricky and Mike would be more comfortable temporarily staying with Sara's parents in Bradenton, which is good because he didn't want them anyway.
Well, I think that would be the sensible thing anyway. Yeah.
Before John Ambrusco left for Florida, he told Fred that this was looking bad for him, and he needed to tell the police who his clients were so they could get to the bottom of this.
Seems reasonable.
Reasonable words.
Yeah.
He might even suspect Fred.
Oh, I'm sure he might. Now, inquiries into Fred's business connections led police to Eddie Lawrence. So he was a real estate developer who shared an office with Fred, and Fred had given him $7,000 just a few weeks earlier. Now, Tuesday Rower, Lawrence's secretary, told police that her boss had been looking for a gun in the weeks prior to Sara's murder and had approached her brother, Curtis. Now, the police found Curtis Rower, who confessed quickly. He told police that Lawrence had offered him the $5,000, plus, he said, a kilo of cocaine, to knock off a woman. In his confession, in an interview with People magazine, which this was strange because I didn't think People magazine really interviewed criminals like that.
Well, whatever sells, right?
I guess, but I just thought that was a strange magazine to be doing that.
Yeah.
But in his confession with People magazine, Rower claimed that he and Lawrence had entered the Tokars' house a week before the murder, planning to kill Sara with a knife, but this is the time that they were scared off by the barking dog.
Yeah.
And then on November 29th, according to Rower, he lay in wait for Sara while Eddie Lawrence stood by in the getaway truck. Now, Fred was in Florida for Christmas holidays that year with his in-laws and sons when the police called to tell him that Curtis Rower and Eddie Lawrence had been arrested. So this is like 3 weeks after the murder.
After the murder.
He's with the in-laws.
Yep.
He gets the call. So Fred listened silently on the phone while John Ambrusco, who was shocked to learn that Eddie Lawrence was Fred's business partner, yelled at Fred, "Your business partner killed Sara?" And Fred said, "I don't believe it. Eddie Lawrence is a good guy. Even my mom says so." So he's got something with his mother, like a...
Yeah. Some relationship here.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem quite
like
right.
An Oedipus complex.
I don't know.
Anyway. Now the boys stayed at Sara's parents' house while Sara's sister Johnny took a leave of absence from her job to be a full-time surrogate mom for Ricky and Mike. And that June, Fred took the boys for one of his twice-monthly regular visits, and he didn't return them. So then when Fred was arrested that August, the boys were with him, living at his mother's house in Palm Beach. Police were only able to make a case against Fred Tokars with Eddie Lawrence's cooperation. And after maintaining that he was innocent, Lawrence agreed to plead guilty to murder and to testify against his former business partner. In exchange for his cooperation, Lawrence was able to escape getting the death penalty.
Yeah, so they made him an offer he couldn't refuse.
Right, but he still got a life sentence.
Yeah.
Now, in 1994, Fred was convicted on racketeering and other federal felonies, and he was given 4 life sentences.
Wow.
Yeah. So he'd done a lot.
He must have been a bad boy.
Yes.
Because that sounds like pretty harsh sentences.
Yeah.
4 life sentences?
Yeah.
Okay.
And those are nonviolent crimes.
Right.
Now, after these federal sentences were upheld on appeal, then he was put on trial in Georgia Superior Court for Sara's murder. And the whole trial was televised on Court TV.
Oh.
Now, they don't do that anymore, do they? I miss Court TV.
Yeah. Why did they stop?
I don't know. Do you think maybe there's like live streaming somewhere of the court cases?
Oh, probably.
But it used to be something that was on all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All those sensational cases.
Yeah, and you could watch, you could kind of get obsessed over watching it.
No kidding.
Yeah. Now, in 1997, the jury found Fred Tokars guilty of murder. And 4 days later, he was sentenced to life in prison. Now, this was despite the prosecution did prove that there were several aggravating circumstances that would have permitted a death sentence, but the jury still chose to give him life, basically for the benefit of his boys, which I don't think the boys ended up caring about that.
No, probably not.
But after his conviction...
And maybe they already figured he's serving 4 life sentences anyway, so why put him to death?
Yeah. Well, I'm not really a pro-death penalty person anyway.
Right.
But after his conviction, Fred Tokars went to the U.S. Penitentiary in Florence, Colorado. And Mikey and Ricky moved to Sara's sister Joni's house, and they never spoke to their father again. Now, an interesting thing was in 2012, the Atlanta News reported that Fred Tokars had helped to solve 6 murders. So he's provided testimony which sent one man to death row. And Tokars said one prosecutor decided to testify so that his sons would one day learn that he was capable of doing something good.
So he's like a jailhouse snitch or something now?
Yes. I don't think he is anymore. In 2012 he was. I think he's fairly handicapped at this point. But Tokars' exact location is a guarded secret. He's in the federal government's witness protection program now.
Well, I bet. I mean, if he ratted people out, he's probably not the most welcome person in the jails.
Yeah. And he's also become an observant Jew. And he, like I said, he's handicapped. He's confined to a wheelchair. He has some kind of neurological or spinal disorder.
Okay.
Yeah. But he did do some good things in prison. I don't know if that matters to anyone, but he did do that.
Well,
and who knows if he even did it.
Doesn't matter to me at all.
Now, Mike Tokars, the younger son, he was interviewed by Tony Rahagan in March 2015. And he was only 4 years old when this happened, but he said that he remembers the night very clearly. He remembers waking up in the back seat of his mother's SUV in the garage of their home. He also recalled how on the next morning he was eating breakfast with his brother and his uncle, and Ricky and Mikey kept saying if only Dad had been there with his gun, he could have saved Mom. That's pretty ironically sad.
Isn't it?
Yeah. Now, family tried to shield the two boys, but sometimes, the subject would come up. And Mike said that over the years, he was open to talking about the murder and about his mother, but his brother Rick just wasn't open to that at all. So they both handled this differently.
Yeah. Rick's the older one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe Rick has more of a real memory of it.
Yeah.
That made him more traumatized.
I'll bet it did.
So I'm thinking some of Mike's memory might be what he heard.
Yeah.
Afterward. How people keep telling you the story of something.
Yeah.
Who knows?
And you form your own memory of it.
Yeah. I'm thinking maybe it was more traumatic for Rick.
So these kids are, in their 20s?
Yeah.
So late 20s, early 30s.
Yeah.
And how are they doing?
Well, Rick went to college in San Diego, and he's an avid surfer. And Mike attended Tallahassee Community College and the University of South Florida, where he majored in history and English literature. So he's a journalist. Mike said his experience gave him insight into and empathy for the people he writes about who've suffered a loss in their life.
Yeah.
And he said that on the 10th anniversary of their mother's murder, he tried to breach the subject of the murder with his brother Rick, but Rick just cut him off and they did activities together. He didn't want to talk.
Well, I can see that.
He's just decided not to talk about it.
Well, it's something we don't mention.
Right. Now, in researching this case, we got a lot of our information from this book, Secrets Never Lie, by R. Robin McDonald. So if anyone's interested in learning more about the events leading up to and following Sarah's murder, I'd really recommend this book to you because there are some really in-depth details of Fred Tokar's business dealings and people he was dealing with in the book. Really fascinating stuff that, in a show we can't get into totally.
Right, but it was a very thoroughly researched book.
Yes, had a lot of information. So if you're interested, that's where you get a lot more information. So before moving to the feedback segment, I'd like to remind everyone about Team Tie Grabber and our members-only podcast episodes. So our first members-only episode, Life of Torture, The Murder of Sylvia Likens, came out last week, and there are more to come. Now, I know quite a few people got it for free before I had the setup fixed, but that's okay, because we'll have new ones coming out at least once a month. And you can join Team Tie Grabber on our website. Just go to tiegrabber.com. And when you join, you also get a gift of a sticker or our cool credit card bottle opener that fits in your wallet, or your own TCB snifter, along with the access to new members-only content.
And there's going to be cases, at least a case each month.
At least. And then I'm sure we'll do special things. Like I thought we might do a video at Christmas time, and maybe we'll do some more movies.
I think it's a fluid thing.
Yes, definitely.
But there's definitely more to come.
Yes, absolutely. And I also would like to encourage listeners to shop the brewery at tiegrabber.com, where you can buy your own TCB t-shirt, snifters, coasters, bottle openers, stickers. You can even commission your own episode of TCB. Now, if you were to commission a podcast, we'll do an episode on the crime you want us to cover. And you could do this for yourself, or you could gift it to someone, and we'll give out a dedication at the beginning. It's a great gift for someone who also loves true crime. We have had a couple of people ask us about doing that, so I'm excited. That's going to be fun.
We're gratified with how many listeners we have. The numbers are climbing each day.
We need it to keep growing. And definitely send us your feedback for the next episode, because the feedback segment is really opening up to be...
We love the feedback.
Yeah. And as always, we're happy to get your 5-star reviews on iTunes. That helps us get more listeners. So now, here's a moment of musical tranquility as we segue into our feedback segment.
Okay.
Yours is the first face that I saw. I think I was blind before I met you. And I don't know where I am, I don't know where I've been, but I know where I want to go. And so I thought I'd let you know. Yeah, these things take forever, I especially am slow. But I realized that I need you, and I wondered if I could come home. Remember the time you drove all night just to meet me in the morning? And I thought it was strange, you said everything changed. You felt as if you just woke up. And you said, this is the first day of my life. I'm glad I didn't die before I met you. But now I don't care, I could go anywhere with you, and I'd probably be happy. So if you wanna be with me.
Okay, welcome to our feedback segment. What have we got? We've got some good stuff today.
We got some stuff today. Some comments and some suggestions on other cases.
Okay, you go ahead. You start first.
So I have a comment first. This was in the Boston Globe on Friday. The judge who presided over the acquittal of Casey Anthony in her murder trial says that the theory that makes the most sense to him is that Anthony accidentally used too much chloroform while trying to quiet Kaylee, and the infant died. Now, this must be a really idiotic judge.
Well, you say that, and when you say that, I think, yeah. When I watched the court, I did find him a little goofy.
I mean,
that's just a goofy thing to say.
If she was accidentally killed with chloroform, why is the tape over her mouth and nose?
Exactly.
I mean, that's the biggest thing.
Right.
So this judge, to me, doesn't know anything that he's discussing. I mean, this is just not
I don't know why he would
reality.
even say that. And why is he even talking about it?
Well, that's what her defense attorney said.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Who's defense attorney?
Kaylee.
Oh, you mean, what's his name?
Casey Anthony's defense attorney.
Jose Baez?
No, another one.
Oh, okay. What's the name of the attorney?
Mason.
Mason, okay.
I'm disturbed that Mr. Perry would once again go to the press with his thoughts about the case. There's no reason for him to do that, is what Mason said.
Well, I think he's correct about that.
Well, yeah, and it's just a totally...
It's a nonsensical statement.
Nonsensible statement.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I agree.
I mean...
That's the whole thing. To me, the duct tape that puts the lid on the coffin for me.
That's just what convicted her in my mind.
But she didn't get convicted.
I know.
Oh, in your mind.
In my mind.
Yes.
Even if you said she drowned accidentally or I overdosed her with chloroform or whatever, it was an accidental death, why are you putting tape over her nose and mouth?
Yes.
So.
Makes no sense.
So.
And even if it was an accidental death with chloroform and the tape hadn't been there, that's got to be a crime.
Right.
Right? It's not a not crime just to, I used too much chloroform. Okay. That's not okay.
So I'm going to give the judge the Asshole of the Week award.
Oh, are we going to have that? I like that. Let's do that.
Well, I don't know if I'm going to do that.
Can't do it every week?
Every week, but he's going to be my nomination for this week.
That's kind of like, remember Keith Olbermann? He had the worst person in the world every week.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we can do something like that from time to time.
All right, so Judge, what's his first name? We'll have a toast.
Belvin Perry, Jr.
Okay, Belvin Perry. You win the Asshole of the Week award.
Congratulations. You got the award, you idiot.
Well, during the case, I thought he was kind of an idiot because he'd make little comments about how people could take a break to go out for a cigarette, and he seemed like a goofy man, but he must be smart in some way if he's a judge. I don't know. Weird.
You might be giving him too much credit.
Maybe. He had to get through school somehow, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, George Bush got through school somehow.
All right, let's not get started.
All right, never mind.
Okay, so I have one about Scott Peterson, and we get a ton of them about Scott Peterson. The episode was A Most Selfish Act, which we did quite a while ago, maybe in the summer.
Scott's one of the favorites.
And most of the emails and comments that I get on Facebook and YouTube about this episode is that most people think he should have been put to death by now. That he should have gotten the death penalty by now. Why is he still there?
He has a death penalty, right? And it just, the wheels of justice go slowly.
Yeah. So the one I picked out was from the Linda Blair, and she had a different take on it. So I'm just going to read a blurb of that.
Okay.
So she says, it's better that he doesn't die so quickly. For those of you who think he should be put to death right away, he lives in a tiny cell. All of his freedom has been taken away. No girlfriends, no getting to have sex with them. Can't go out to eat his favorite food. Can't see awesome movies. Can't do his favorite sports. Can't drive. No vacations. Can't see his family or friends. I bet he even misses going to work right now. Instead, he has nothing to look forward to except death. Death will end the suffering of his miserable, lonely life. Maybe the pure boredom will kill him, or he will go crazy, thinking about how he screwed up, all the mistakes he made, or maybe he will regret killing a beautiful woman who loved him and a son that may have turned out to be a joy. Maybe he will regret knowing that he does not have one single friend on earth. If he did win his freedom, it wouldn't do any good. He would still be known as a killer. He would never recover what he lost. No place to run to. He would only know hatred on the outside and people wanting to kill him. The day, if it ever comes and he is put to death, will only put him out of his misery. So what I thought is this is a really good point, but then I thought of that Geraldo Rivera special that they did like 5 or 10 years out. I can't remember when it was done, on Scott Peterson and what his life was like. And it really didn't seem like his life was that bad, unfortunately.
Yeah, well,
he was out playing basketball and...
I mean, part of you wants to have him suffer.
Of course. I think most people want him to suffer.
And so you want him to be under pretty draconian conditions in jail, which might not always occur. So, I don't know. I mean, I've switched from being a pro-death penalty person to a life in prison person, just to remind people while they live what it means to have your freedom taken away. So I'm not sure whether he's under relatively favorable conditions or not. He's still in prison.
That's true.
He can't do what he would like to be doing.
Well, yeah, Linda Blair made that clear.
So,
but from what Geraldo Rivera said, his life was not that bad there.
Well,
but you're saying just losing your freedom's enough?
It might not be that bad, but he's not able to come and go as he pleases or do things that he wants to do. He lives a regimented life.
And most importantly, he's not a threat to anyone anymore.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, I've got some stuff on the Munchausen by proxy, the Lacey Spears story. This is from Nunakavungu on YouTube. So she or he is wondering if we would consider doing a podcast on Beverly Allett at some point, who was apparently a British woman suffering from Munchausen by proxy who worked as a nurse on a children's ward and ended up killing 4 of her patients and injuring several others before her crimes were discovered. So the question is, when would you suspect a member of the medical staff is harming patients? So from my standpoint, which I've never seen this,
well, that's
fortunately, but I would be looking at deaths that were unexpected or maybe expected but sudden. And if you're starting to see a pattern of this, then you start looking at who's present at these deaths, and you can usually figure out what's going on.
Yeah, but this kind of crime by its very nature takes more than one death to even
it does.
Find out, so that's scary.
Well, I'm recalling a book I read, I think it's called The Good Nurse, about a nurse in the New Jersey, Pennsylvania area who killed dozens of people, but kept moving from hospital to hospital and didn't get caught for quite a long time. So it's not the easiest thing to do, to find out what's going on. But that's what you'd look for.
Oh, well, that nurse, he worked in ICUs, didn't he?
Yeah. I mean, he worked in places where deaths were not uncommon.
Right, which made it even harder.
But they died, a lot of people died unexpectedly.
Okay.
So that's how they finally figured that out. And then Nunakavungu also gave, I know I'm butchering that. Another interesting case is that of Carol Carr, who killed 2 of her adult sons who suffered from Huntington's disease.
Well, no, that's totally different to me.
It is.
That's not Munchausen. That's a mercy killing.
Well,
I believe I saw a documentary on this woman, if I'm thinking of the right one, and this was a miserable situation. Her 2 sons, you know how Huntington's disease is horrible.
Is just a horrendous disease.
Her kids were miserable.
So maybe it wasn't a killing for that reason, but the kids who were affected, I don't know.
Oh, I thought so. I mean, these were adult kids, I think, right?
Yeah, they were. But I think the first one about the nurse killing pediatric patients would be worthy of discussion.
Okay. All right, we'll look into that. That is interesting. I might like to look into that one.
Yeah, well, it seems that people have responded to the Munchausen by proxy cases. So
those are fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, the thought process that goes into that.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
Right. Well, Lacey Spears was just fascinating because you saw this pattern all through, even when she was a teenager. You saw it coming.
Yeah.
Kind of. Yeah. So I have a little bit of feedback on the most recent case we did, the murder of Laura Ackerman, A Bitter End. And this is from Charlie in Massachusetts. So Amanda Hayes, we know that she was convicted of murder, but then a grand jury indicted her for some crimes in Texas for dumping the body.
So what's that? So
she was being extradited to
disposal?
Texas. Well, I think it's more than that. It's tampering with physical evidence and a human corpse.
Yeah.
So it
now,
says
she got away. What was her sentence? 2nd-degree murder or something?
2nd-degree murder. She got, yeah.
So she got the relatively lighter sentence.
Yes, but she faces a possible 20 years for this felony, second-degree tampering with a human corpse. This is what she's charged with.
So that would add on to her original sentence.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, I'm for that.
Yeah, so in 2014, she was convicted with 2nd-degree murder in North Carolina. And then it was in 2015 that the grand jury met, and they decided to extradite her to Texas for these other charges. But another interesting thing I don't know if we mentioned was that since she's been in prison, she's accrued 5 infractions. Did we talk about that?
No, we didn't.
So she's had some infractions, including disobeying an order in May 2015, 2 sexual acts, and possession of contraband in July 2015, and then possession of contraband in March 2016.
So not a model prisoner.
Which shouldn't surprise us. She was a terrible person. She is a terrible person.
She is.
Yeah. So she's currently serving her 13 years and 1 month to 16 years and 6 months at the North Carolina Correctional Institute for Women.
Right, but facing additional charges in Texas.
Up to another 20 years for what she did with the corpse.
Okay.
So I thought that was an interesting thing. So thanks, Charlie, for sending that in.
Yeah, that looks interesting. So another case recommendation. This is an email from Susan. This is about a family man who has no criminal history or mental health problems who killed his daughter because she was suffering from migraine, and apparently killed all his family and left a chilling Facebook status update about the slaying. His quote is, "I took a gun and shot her in the head. Now she's migraine-free and floating in the clouds."
Sounds like he had some issues.
Doesn't it?
So he killed more than just her?
This is a Canadian guy. So that's something to look into.
Yeah. So you're saying he killed his whole family?
That's what it says.
Yeah, that's a weird one.
Yeah.
So it was in Canada?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we'll look into that one.
Okay.
And I guess that's all we have for today then. That wraps it up.
See you guys.
Okay, bye-bye.